Isla de la Sombra, the Caribbean. The night before the wedding. The ocean looks like black glass, and the wind scrapes the palm fronds like dry fingernails. I am Alice Shelton, and from the shadows I watch my family celebrate my failure. They drink champagne under string lights, mocking the sister they think is broken. But they don't know the truth. They don't know the failure holds the deed to the ground beneath their Italian leather shoes. They believe they are kings and queens of this paradise, unaware they are partying in a trap. And tomorrow I will finally close the door. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. If you've never stood on your own island while your family trashes you on it, you can't possibly imagine how quiet rage sounds. It doesn't sound like screaming. It sounds like the wind hissing through palm fronds, scraping them together like dry fingernails. It sounds like the ocean, heavy and black as glass, slapping against the pylons of the dock in a rhythm that mimics a slow, dangerous heartbeat. I stood on the balcony of the administration building, hidden by the deep shadows of a hibiscus hedge. 200 yards away, the resort lights glittered against the Caribbean darkness. That lighting system was one of the first upgrades I authorized when I acquired the property. It was efficient, solar integrated, and incredibly expensive. Tonight, it was illuminating my sister's rehearsal dinner. I could hear the clink of crystal, the curated swell of a string quartet, and the distinct, piercing laughter of people who have never had to worry about the cost of anything. I looked down at the folder in my hands. It was a standard venue ledger, the kind the resort manager used to track daily overhead for VIP events. On the front, a crisp white label read, "Welcome the Whitakers." I ran my thumb over the text, feeling the raised ink. From where they were sitting, sipping my vintage champagne and walking on my imported limestone pavers, this island was just another backdrop. It was a paradise they had rented to show the world how important they were. They thought they were the kings and queens of the sandbar. They didn't know they were partying in my living room. I glanced back through the glass doors of the office. The monitors were humming, displaying security feeds from the perimeter. I saw the staff moving like a coordinated crew, efficient and invisible. I saw the biometric lock on the door that only accepted one thumbprint, mine. My family didn't know that the failure of the Shelton line held the deed to the ground beneath their Italian leather shoes. They didn't know that by tomorrow night, half the people celebrating over there would be begging to leave. To understand why I didn't just kick them out, why I let them come here, why I let them insult me to my face, you have to understand the architecture of the Shelton family. My father, Richard, was a man who believed love was a transaction, a commodity to be traded for status. He was a corporate climber who used tough love as a thinly veiled excuse to be cruel. If his stock portfolio was up, he was a father. If it was down, he was a drill sergeant looking for a recruit to punish. My mother, Cynthia, was the PR department. Her entire existence was a frantic, breathless attempt to curate a life that looked good on a Christmas card. She didn't care if we were happy. She cared if the neighbors thought we were happy. She weaponized shame like a surgeon with a scalpel, cutting away anything that didn't fit the aesthetic. And then there was Madeline, my sister, the golden child. She was the one who could do no wrong. If she crashed a car, she was the victim of unsafe roads. If she failed a class, the teacher was incompetent. I, on the other hand, was the scapegoat. I was the sponge that absorbed the family's stress. When Dad got laid off during a merger, I was suddenly too loud and too messy. When Mom's anxiety spiked because she wasn't invited to the right charity gala, it was my fault for not helping enough around the house. The trauma wasn't one big explosion, it was 1,000 paper cuts. It was the way my accomplishments were minimized while hers were paraded. I made the dean's list. "That's nice, Alice, but did you hear Madeline made captain of the cheer squad?" It was the jokes at my expense during holidays, the way Dad would chuckle and say, "Alice is still figuring out who she wants to be," while I was working 2 jobs and carrying a full course load. But the wound that never healed, the one that eventually turned into the scar tissue I wear, like armor, happened when I was 22. I was finishing my degree working as a waitress to pay rent because my parents didn't believe in handouts for me despite funding Madeline's entire existence. My car, a rusted Honda, that was my only lifeline to my job, blew its transmission. The repair bill was exactly $1,800. I didn't have it. If I couldn't fix the car, I couldn't get to my shifts. If I lost the shifts, I lost my apartment. I swallowed my pride. I went to their house. I sat at the pristine marble kitchen island and begged. I showed them my budget. I promised to pay them back with interest. I cried, which was something I rarely did in front of them. My father didn't even look up from his iPad. "Alice," he said, his voice flat and bored, "if we bail you out, you'll never learn resilience. This is a teaching moment. Figure it out." I walked out devastated. I slept in that broken car for 3 weeks, showering at the university gym. 2 days after they refused me, I saw the social media post. They had bought Madeline a brand new Audi for her half-birthday. The caption read, "Because our princess deserves the best." That was the moment the daughter in me died. I realized I wasn't a member of the family. I was an accessory they didn't like, but couldn't return. I graduated, packed a single suitcase, and left. I made a vow to the girl in the rearview mirror. No more begging. No more permission. I disappeared into the city. I stopped coming home for Thanksgiving. I stopped answering the guilt trip texts. And I started building. I didn't go for something flashy. I didn't want to be an influencer like Madeline chasing likes and validation. I wanted leverage. I went into supply chain software and corporate compliance. It sounds boring, I know. That's the point. Boring is where the real money hides. I built a firm, Aegis Compliance, that helped massive global conglomerates ensure their overseas factories weren't breaking labor laws or leaking revenue. It was unsexy, tedious, high-stakes work. And it paid. God, did it pay. By 27, I had sold the majority stake to a private equity firm, but stayed on as a consultant. I had 8 figures in the bank, and nobody knew. I wore jeans. I drove a Volvo. I kept my head down because in the Shelton house, attention was a weapon. If they knew I had money, they would try to claim it, control it, or take credit for it. So I kept my mouth shut. I bought the island 3 years ago. It wasn't a flex. I didn't buy it to host parties with rappers or models. I bought it because the world is loud and I wanted quiet. I wanted a place where no one could tell me I wasn't good enough. I set it up through a blind trust and a management company. To the public record, this place was owned by Blue Horizon Ventures. To the staff, I was just Ms. Shelton, the woman who paid fair wages, funded the local school's computer lab, and treated them like human beings. I was happy. I was free. I was safe. Then came the call. It was Madeline. Her voice was sickly sweet, the tone she used when she wanted something pitch perfect and cloying. "Allie? Oh my God, are you sitting down? I'm getting married to Graham Whitaker. Can you believe it?" She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask where I was living. Then Mom got on the line the closer. "Alice, the wedding is going to be a destination event. Very exclusive. We've rented this incredible private island in the Caribbean. Now look, we know things have been difficult for you, but it would mean everything if you came. Just, please, Alice, don't embarrass us by not showing up. People will talk." The audacity took my breath away. They treated me like a stain on the family portrait, but they needed me there to complete the set. They needed the supportive sister prop to perform the perfect family tableau. I almost said no. I almost told them to go to hell. But then I looked at the location they mentioned on the digital invite. Isla de la Sombra. My island. My management team must have booked it. My parents and the Whitakers had no idea who owned the holding company. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. It wasn't anger. It was opportunity. "I'll be there," I said. I didn't agree for revenge, not at first. I agreed for closure. I wanted to see if I could stand in the same room as them and not feel small. I wanted to prove that the broken girl sleeping in her car was gone. I had arrived 3 hours ago by a private charter boat, keeping a low profile. The approach to the island usually filled me with peace, the water turning from deep navy to turquoise, the white sand cutting a sharp line against the jungle. But today the dock was crowded with the Whitaker wedding signage. As I stepped off the gangway, the island manager Devon was waiting. Devon was a former British Royal Marine built like a tank, but with the demeanor of a high-end butler. He knew everything about the ownership structure. He saw me and immediately stiffened his hand, going to his radio, about to call for the VIP transport. He started to bow his head. "Ms. Shell." I caught his eye and gave a nearly imperceptible shake of my head. "Don't." Devon paused. He was a professional. He adjusted his stance, instantly shifting from greeting the owner to greeting a generic guest. "Welcome to the island, ma'am," he said, though his eyes were sparkling with unspoken questions. "May I take your bags?" "Thank you, Devon," I said softly. I walked up the path toward the main resort, the gravel crunching under my boots. The humidity wrapped around me. I could see my family gathered near the lobby entrance. Dad was shouting something at a bellhop about luggage handling, his face red with unnecessary exertion. Mom was frantically tapping on her phone, ignoring the breathtaking sunset behind her. Madeline was posing for a selfie with a coconut, tilting her head just so. They looked exactly the same. And as I walked into their line of sight, I felt that old familiar gravity trying to pull me down to my knees. But then I remembered the biometric lock on the office door. I remembered the bank account numbers they would never see. I wasn't the scapegoat anymore. I was the landlord. And rent was due. The reunion began exactly the way a car crash does, with a sickening crunch you hear before you feel. I approached the open-air lobby where my family held court. The ceiling fans lazily chopped the humid air, and the scent of expensive jasmine oil, the signature scent I had chosen for the resort, filled the space. My father Richard was the first to spot me. He didn't smile. He didn't open his arms. He scanned me up and down, looking for a loose thread, a scuffed shoe, anything to validate his disappointment. "Well," he said, his voice carrying over the luggage cart, "look at you. You actually made it." "Hello, Dad," I said, keeping my hands clasped in front of me to stop them from shaking. He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "I saw you talking to the porter on the dock. You looked comfortable. Got yourself a little vacation job working the boats. It would explain why you're late." "I was just catching up with an old friend," I said neutrally. Mom stepped forward, then smoothing the front of her linen dress. She offered me her cheek, cold and powdery, like presenting a stone to be kissed. "Don't be ridiculous, Richard. Alice isn't working." She pulled back and whispered loud enough for the bellhops to hear. "But really, Alice, don't cling to the staff. It looks desperate. We're here to be served, not to make friends with the help." Then came the centerpiece. Madeline. She detached herself from her fiancé, a man named Brent, who had the polished, vacant look of a catalog model, and floated toward me. She was beautiful. I couldn't deny that. She looked like she had been born in soft focus. "Ali." She squeezed my arm, her nails digging in just enough to register as a pinch. "You're here. Try not to flirt with the groomsmen, okay? Brent's cousins are from very conservative families, and we don't want any scenes." I swallowed, the bile rising in my throat. "I'm just here to watch you get married, Maddie. That's it." "Good," she chirped, turning back to the group, instantly erasing me from the conversation. "Now, does anyone have the itinerary I need to know when the massage therapists are ready for me?" I stood there, surrounded by the luxury I had built, watching them consume it while treating me like an intruder. They didn't just misunderstand me. They needed me to be small so they could feel tall. The humiliation didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, deliberate erosion designed to remind me of my place in the hierarchy. The first strike came the next morning. I was in the main pavilion checking my emails on my phone, handling a minor crisis involving a compliance audit in heavy manufacturing, when Madeline stormed in. She was flanked by two bridesmaids who looked at me with identical expressions of pitying amusement. "Alice, thank God," Madeline sighed, dropping a heavy box of cardstock onto the table in front of me. The wedding planner is useless. She messed up the seating chart for the reception. I need you to fix it. I looked at the box. Maddie, I'm working right now. Working? She laughed, a bright, sharp sound. Doing what answering surveys for gift cards. Please, this is important. I need you to rewrite the place cards. You have that serviceable handwriting. And honestly, it's the least you can do since you didn't chip in for the bachelorette party. I hadn't been invited to the bachelorette party. I'm not doing your seating chart, I said calmly. Madeline's face dropped. The mask slipped. Excuse me. I said no. Ask the planner. That's what you're paying her for. I'm asking you, she hissed, leaning in, because you're my sister and because you're staying here for free. Do you have any idea what these villas cost per night? Dad is spending a fortune so you can have a vacation. Run the cards to the calligraphy suite when you're done. Don't make me ask Mom to get involved. She walked away before I could respond, leaving the box. The bridesmaids followed, casting backward glances. I sat there staring at the cards. I could have thrown them in the ocean. I could have told her that Dad wasn't paying a dime for my villa or hers for that matter. But I didn't. I wasn't ready to detonate the bomb yet. So I picked up the pen. I did the damn cards. But as I wrote each name, I felt something shift inside me. The patience was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. Later that afternoon, the second strike landed. It was cocktail hour at the Sunset Bar, a stunning cantilevered deck over the water. I had designed this spot specifically for the acoustic profile. You could hear the waves perfectly without shouting over the wind. I was standing near the railing with a glass of sparkling water, watching the guests mingle. I saw my mother holding court with a group of Brent's relatives, wealthy East Coast types with sweaters tied around their necks. "And what does your other daughter do?" a woman asked, gesturing vaguely in my direction. I froze. This was the test. Mom didn't miss a beat. She lowered her voice, adopting a tone of tragic confidentiality. "Oh, Alice is taking some time. She's between opportunities right now. We're supporting her while she figures out who she is. It's been a long road, but we're hopeful." "How noble of you," the woman cooed. "It's so hard when they fail to launch, isn't it? We just want her to be happy." Mom sighed, sipping her martini. "Even if she's not ambitious like Madeline." I gripped my glass so hard I thought it would shatter. Fail to launch. I had just closed a deal last week that was worth more than Brent's father's entire estate. I had employees who had bought houses because of the bonuses I signed off on. But to Cynthia Shelton, I was a charity case, because acknowledging my success would mean admitting she had no control over me. But the island itself kept fighting back. The reality of Isla de la Sombra refused to cooperate with their narrative. It started with small things. At lunch, the head of catering, a stern French woman named Alice, who terrified most guests, bypassed my father entirely to come to my side of the table. "Ms. Shelton," Alice said, her voice deferential, "regarding the vintage for the toast, we have the 008 Bollinger you prefer in the cellar. Should I have it chilled or stick to the package selection?" The table went quiet. My father frowned. "I didn't order Bollinger. And why are you asking her? I'm paying the bill." Alice blinked, looking momentarily confused. She looked at me, her eyes darting to my father, then back to me. She knew the hierarchy of the island, even if she didn't understand the hierarchy of the family. "I assumed Ms. Shelton would have a preference," Alice stammered. "Stick to the list," Dad snapped. "Alice doesn't know the difference between Bollinger and box wine." Alice stiffened. "Very well, sir." She walked away, but before she left the patio, she caught my eye and gave a subtle apologetic nod. "Weird," Madeline muttered, picking at her salad. "Why is the staff so obsessed with you? Have you been sleeping with one of them?" "Madeline?" Mom gasped. "Don't be gross." "Well, I'm just saying," Madeline shrugged. "It's the only reason they'd care what she thinks. Maybe she's banging the groundskeeper." I took a slow breath. "Maybe they just recognize manners," I said. Dad slammed his fork down. "Enough! Alice, stop distracting the staff. You're confusing them. They see a Shelton, and they get confused because they don't know you're the silent branch of the family. The pressure cooker was building. The narrative of the wedding of the century was based entirely on the premise of my father's immense generosity and wealth. Everywhere I turned, I heard them bragging about the cost. We spared no expense. I heard Dad tell a group of investors near the pool, this island, private charter only, had to pull a lot of strings to get the exclusive booking, but for Madeline, only the best. The truth was gnawing at me. The island was comped, all of it. The villas, the catering, the transport. My holding company had absorbed the costs under a marketing write-off protocol I had established for VIPs, which I had triggered when I saw the booking request come through months ago. Dad wasn't paying a premium. He was paying for incidentals. He was bragging about a feast he hadn't bought in a house he didn't own, to a daughter he didn't know. I wasn't angry about the money. I had plenty of money. I was angry about the lie. They were building a monument to their own greatness on a foundation I had poured, all while kicking me in the shins. Then came the seed of the end. During the rehearsal dinner, humiliation number 3, the whispers started. The air in the room changed. I saw heads turning, people checking their phones and murmuring. "Did you hear?" A woman near me whispered to her husband. "The Whitakers are coming. The real Whitakers." "Graham Whitaker?" the husband asked, eyes widening. "The CEO, I thought he never left New York." My stomach did a flip. Graham Whitaker. I knew him. Not as a celebrity, but as a colleague. We sat on the same philanthropic board for ocean conservation. He was a titan of industry, a man who moved markets with a sneeze. He was also the distant estranger uncle of the groom, the white whale my father and Madeline had been desperate to land for the guest list, but had assumed wouldn't show. "I heard his jet landed an hour ago," someone else said. "This wedding just went up a tax bracket." Alice's internal alarm bells started ringing. If Graham saw me, he wouldn't see Alice the failure. He would see Alice Shelton, CEO of Aegis. He would greet me as an equal. And if he did that in front of my father, the explosion wouldn't be controlled. It would be nuclear. I wanted to hide. I wanted to run to my villa and lock the door. But I couldn't. I refused to hide on my own property. The midpoint, the moment of no return, happened 20 minutes later. I was trying to slip away from the dinner to get some air. I walked along the perimeter of the dining tent near the service entrance. Suddenly, a hand clamped onto my arm. It was my father. His face was flushed with wine and the high of being the center of attention. He pulled me into the shadows away from the guests. "Where are you going?" he demanded. "Just for a walk, Dad. I have a headache." "You're lying. You're sulking. You've been moping around with a long face all week, bringing the mood down." He leaned in, his breath sour with the wine I had paid for. "Let me make something clear to you, Alice. Graham Whitaker is coming tomorrow. Do you understand what that means for this family, for my business?" "It's a big deal," I said quietly. "It's everything," he hissed. "So here's the rule. When he gets here, you stay in the background. Do not approach him. Do not try to make conversation. I don't want you embarrassing us with your situation. If he asks what you do, you tell him you're assisting with the wedding coordination. Do you hear me? You stay in your lane." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the sound of a deadbolt sliding into place. "You want me to pretend I'm staff?" I asked, my voice dangerously steady. "I want you to be useful," he spat. "For once in your life, contribute to this family by not ruining the image we've built. Smile, keep your mouth shut, and stay out of the way." He released my arm and shoved me lightly toward the darkness. "Go to bed. You look tired." I watched him walk back into the light, back to the applause and the toasts. I stood there in the dark, rubbing my arm where he had grabbed me. The vow I had made to myself shifted. It changed from endure to end this. I turned and walked straight to the administration building. I bypassed the front desk and went to the secure office. I pressed my thumb to the scanner. The light turned green. Access granted. Inside, the air conditioning was humming. I sat at the master terminal. My hands were steady now. First, I called Jenna, my personal attorney in Chicago. It was late there, but she picked up on the first ring. Alice, is everything okay? No, I said. But it's about to be. I need you to prep a cease and desist package, and I need the ownership deeds for Isla de la Sombra ready to be digitally projected. Can you link to the resort's AV system remotely? I can have it ready in an hour. What are you doing, Alice? I'm correcting the record, I said. Next I radioed Devon. Yes, Ms. Shelton. Devon, initiate Protocol V. Ensure all guest transport is on standby at the docks by 10:00 p.m. tomorrow. No one gets stranded no matter what happens. The staff are to remain professional, but I want security increased at the main pavilion. And Devon. Ma'am. If my father yells at anyone at all, I want it logged. Understood, ma'am. He already berated a busboy 10 minutes ago. It's logged. Good. One more thing. Tomorrow night during the reception, I'm going to need the microphone. I'll make sure it's live. I hung up. I wasn't going to ruin a wedding. I was going to stop a lie. I walked back to my room, not as the daughter but as the strategist. The next day, the day of the wedding, passed in a blur of frantic activity. I stayed true to my word. I stayed out of the way. I watched the ceremony from the back row. I watched Madeline say her vows looking radiant and triumphant. I watched my parents weep tears of performative joy. But the peak of the rising action, the moment that sealed their fate, happened just before the reception dinner began. We were in the holding area, a beautiful stone courtyard where the bridal party was taking photos. Madeline was sipping red wine through a straw to protect her lipstick. I was standing 10 feet away, holding her purse because she had shoved it at me. Alice, she called out. Come here. Mom says we need one photo with you so people don't ask questions. I walked over. I was wearing a simple, elegant navy dress, one of the few nice things I had brought. As I stepped next to her, Madeline pivoted. Maybe she tripped. Maybe she just didn't care where her hands were. But the glass of red wine in her hand tipped. A dark crimson wave splashed across the front of my dress. It soaked instantly into the silk, a jagged, bloody stain right over my heart. The courtyard went silent. Madeline gasped, but her hand flew to her mouth to cover a smile. I saw it. I saw the crinkle in her eyes. Oh my God, she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. Alice, why are you always so clumsy? You bumped right into me. I didn't move, I said. My father groaned. For Christ's sake, Alice, can't you go 1 hour without making a mess? Look at you. You look like a disaster. Go change, Mom snapped, waving her hand dismissively. Although God knows what else you have that's appropriate. Just get out of the photos. You're ruining the aesthetic, Madeline giggled. At least it didn't get on my dress. That would have been a tragedy. They laughed, all of them. My father, my mother, my sister, the bridesmaids. They laughed at the stain on my chest, at the humiliation of being the clumsy, unwanted failure. I looked at them. I looked at the joy they took in my smallness. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. A strange, icy calm washed over me. It was the calm of a judge delivering a sentence. You're right, I said softly. I should go change. I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I walked with a straight spine, the wine cooling against my skin. Don't take too long, Dad shouted after me. Graham Whitaker will be here soon. Try not to look like a hobo when he arrives. I kept walking. Don't worry, Dad, I thought. I'll be back. I went to my room. I took off the ruined dress. I showered, scrubbing the wine from my skin. Then I opened the garment bag I had kept hidden in the back of the closet. I didn't put on another bridesmaid dress. I put on the suit I wore to board meetings. A tailored white power suit, sharp as a razor, immaculate and commanding. I pulled my hair back into a tight, severe bun. I put on my diamond studs, the real ones, the ones that cost more than Madeline's car. I looked in the mirror. The sister was gone. The CEO was here. I checked my watch. Graham Whitaker's boat had just docked. It was time. The reception was a masterpiece of atmospheric engineering, exactly as I had designed it to be. The ocean breeze had died down to a gentle caress. The tiki torches cast a warm, flattering glow over the crowd, and a jazz band played a smooth, unobtrusive melody on the stage. It was the perfect stage for the Shelton family's greatest performance. I walked back into the event space, but not through the service entrance this time. I walked down the center aisle, the limestone pavers clicking sharply beneath the heels of my pumps. The white suit was a stark, luminous contrast to the sea of pastels and tropical prints. It was armor. It was a uniform of authority. I saw heads turn. A few people frowned, confused by the change in wardrobe. Was this a costume change? Was I staff? Was I crashing? I ignored them all, positioning myself near the champagne tower, a vantage point that offered a clear line of sight to the main entrance. My family was holding court near the head table. Madeline was laughing, throwing her head back, her hand resting possessively on her new husband's chest. Dad was swirling a glass of scotch, looking like a lord surveying his fiefdom. Mom was whispering to a photographer, directing him to capture her good side. Then the energy in the room shifted. It wasn't a sound, it was a vacuum. The air was sucked out of the conversation as the heavy mahogany doors at the top of the stairs swung open. Graham Whitaker had arrived. He didn't look like a celebrity. He looked like old money. He wore a linen suit that probably cost more than the average American mortgage, but he wore it carelessly. He was flanked by 2 assistants and a security detail moving with the gravitational pull of a planet. My father's head snapped up. I saw the transformation happen in real time. He straightened his spine, buttoned his jacket, and put on his business smile, the one that showed too many teeth. He nudged Mom. He tapped Madeline. He's here. Showtime. Graham descended the stairs, his eyes scanning the crowd. He wasn't looking for the bar. He wasn't looking for the bride. He was looking for someone specific. My father stepped forward, extending his hand, ready to intercept the billionaire and claim the social credit. "Mr. Whitaker," Dad boomed, his voice projected for the entire room to hear. "Richard Shelton, it is an absolute honor to welcome you to our—" Graham didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. He looked right through my father as if he were a waiter offering a tray of empty glasses. He walked past the groom, his own nephew. He walked past Madeline, whose smile froze into a rictus of confusion. He walked straight to me. The room went deathly silent. The jazz band faltered, and then stopped, sensing the change in the atmosphere. Every eye in the venue followed Graham Whitaker as he crossed the floor and stopped 2 feet in front of me. He smiled, a genuine, respectful smile. "Alice Shelton," he said. His voice was deep, carrying effortlessly in the silence. "I didn't expect to see you here." I extended my hand. "Hello, Graham. It's been a while. Since the Geneva summit, I think." He took my hand, shaking it firmly. "Geneva, yes. And I saw the quarterly report for Aegis last week. Impressive numbers on the Asian compliance sector. You're scaring the competition, Ms. Shelton." Ms. Shelton, CEO. The words hung in the humid air like smoke. I saw my father blink. His brain was trying to load a page that didn't exist. He stuttered, stepping into our circle, desperate to regain control of the narrative. "Mr. Whitaker, surely there's a mistake. This is Alice, my daughter. She's currently between positions. She's helping us with the coordination." Graham turned to my father slowly. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by the cold steel of a man who ate sharks for breakfast. "Between positions," Graham repeated. "Richard, isn't it? Your daughter runs one of the most successful compliance firms in North America. We sit on a board together. She's not helping, she's a peer." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Mom's face went paper white. Madeline looked from Graham to me, her mouth slightly open, the gears in her head grinding against the rust of her own ego. Graham looked back at me, raising an eyebrow. "They don't know—" "No," I said calmly. "They prefer their own version of the story." I gently withdrew my hand from his and turned to the room. I caught Devin's eye in the shadows. He nodded. He handed me a microphone. I didn't scream. I didn't monologue like a comic book villain. I stepped up to the small platform near the champagne tower. I held the microphone with the ease of someone who had briefed shareholders during a crisis. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice was steady, magnified by the speakers I had paid for. "I want to clarify a few things, because accuracy is important to me." I gestured to the screen behind the band, usually reserved for a slideshow of the couple. The image flickered and changed. It wasn't a photo of Madeline. It was a deed of ownership. "My name is Alice Shelton," I continued. "I am the founder and majority shareholder of Aegis Compliance. I am also the sole owner of the holding company Blue Horizon Ventures." I pointed to the floor. "Which means I own this island. Every grain of sand, every villa, every bottle of wine you are drinking tonight belongs to me." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Phones came out. I saw the flashes going off. "For the past 6 months," I said, looking directly at my parents, "I have listened to my family take credit for this event. I have heard them boast about sparing no expense. The truth is, I flagged this booking in my system. I applied a 90% discount to the venue fees. I comped the catering. I absorbed the transport costs. I let that sink in. I paid for this wedding," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming sharper. "Not because I wanted credit, but because I wanted to see if at any point my family would treat me like a human being without knowing what I could do for them." I paused. "They didn't." "That's a lie." The scream came from Madeline. She broke out of her paralysis, storming toward the stage. Her face was twisted, ugly with panic. "She's lying. She's jealous. She's always been jealous of me. She's ruining my day because she's a miserable little—" "Stop," I said. I didn't shout it. I just projected it with enough authority that she actually skidded to a halt. "If I'm lying, Madeline," I said, "ask Graham to call my board. Or better yet, look at the screen." The image changed again. It was a breakdown of the invoices. Amount due, $145,000. Amount paid by R. Shelton, $0. Amount waived by owner, $145,000. "You didn't know," I said, looking at my father, whose face was now a dangerous shade of purple. "Because you never asked. You never asked me what I did. You never asked me where I lived. You never asked me who I was. You were so busy telling everyone how I had failed that you missed the fact that I outgrew you." My father found his voice. He tried to use his size, his rage to dominate the space. "This is a misunderstanding. You ungrateful. How dare you do this to us, after everything we did for you? We raised you. We put a roof over your head." "You put a roof over a scapegoat," I corrected. "And when I needed you when I was 22 and sleeping in my car, you told me to figure it out. So I did." I turned to the guests. I saw the shock on their faces, but I also saw something else. Respect. Some of them were nodding. They knew. They had seen the way my family treated me all week. "I am not going to ruin the night for the guests," I announced, pivoting to the moral high ground. "Please eat the food. Drink the wine. My staff will continue to serve you with the excellence you deserve. Transport will be available for anyone who wishes to leave early." I turned back to my family. "However, my hospitality has limits." I looked at Devon. "Effective immediately, the bridal suite and the parents' villa are locked. Their access codes have been revoked." "You can't do that," Mom shrieked, clutching her pearls. "Where are we supposed to sleep?" "There are staff quarters available near the generator," I said, my voice devoid of pity. "Or you can take the supply boat back to the mainland at midnight. It's a cargo haul, but it's free." "Alice, please," Madeline sobbed, switching tactics to victimhood. "It's my wedding night. You can't kick me out of my room." "It's not your room, Madeline. It's my asset. And you just spent the last 48 hours treating the owner like a servant. You spilt wine on me and laughed. You told me I wasn't good enough to be in the photos. Well, now you're not good enough to stay in the master villa." I stepped down from the platform. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. My father lunged forward, grabbing my arm, the same arm he had bruised the night before. "You fix this," he snarled, his eyes bulging. You fix this right now, or so help me God. Let go of her. Graham Whitaker didn't shout, but his voice cracked like a whip. He stepped in his security detail, moving with him. My father released me instantly, shrinking back. Mr. Shelton, Graham said, his voice dripping with disdain. If you touch her again, I will have my security team escort you off this island in handcuffs. And believe me, I have the jurisdiction. I adjusted my jacket, smoothing the fabric where my father had grabbed me. One last thing, I said, looking at the three of them. The father who bullied me, the mother who erased me, the sister who mocked me. They looked small, they looked terrified. They didn't look like giants anymore. My legal team will be contacting you on Monday regarding the defamation of my character you've been spreading to my business partners this week. And if you attempt to contact me or come near my properties, it will be treated as harassment. Alice, Mom whispered, tears streaming down her face. Real tears this time, tears of lost status. We're family. I looked at her, and I felt absolutely nothing. The cord was cut. No, I said. We're relatives. There's a difference. I turned my back on them. I walked toward the exit, past the stunned guests, past the frozen waiters, toward the dark, quiet beach. As I reached the edge of the light, I heard Graham speaking to his assistant behind me. Get the car ready, and get me the number for the compliance audit on the Whitaker merger. I want Aegis on it. I kept walking. I came here to be part of their story, a footnote in their book of glory. I was leaving as the author of my own. The silence that followed my exit wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the air before a hurricane makes landfall. I walked away from the glow of the reception, my heels sinking slightly into the manicured grass, the adrenaline coursing through my veins like ice water. I didn't look back, but I could hear the murmur of the crowd shifting. It wasn't the festive buzz of a wedding anymore. It was the low, frantic hum of gossip, of alliances breaking and reforming in real time. I barely made it to the edge of the terrace before the first wave of guests caught up with me. I braced myself for judgment, for the blind loyalty that wealthy circles often extend to their own. But I was wrong. It was Mrs. Callahan, a woman who had only hours earlier laughed when my sister made a joke about my discount rack shoes. She looked pale, her hand clutching her husband's arm. Alice, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Ms. Shelton, we had no idea. It's fine, Mrs. Callahan, I said, keeping my stride steady but not unkind. You only knew what you were told. No, she insisted, stepping into my path. It's not fine. We laughed. We thought, God, it was cruel. I am so incredibly sorry. I looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes, not fear of me exactly, but fear of being on the wrong side of power. But underneath that, there was a flicker of genuine shame. Thank you, I said quietly. Enjoy the rest of the evening. The dessert bar is excellent. As I continued down the path, I noticed a pattern emerging. The people who had character, the ones who had looked uncomfortable during the toasts, the ones who had smiled at the staff, were the ones meeting my eyes, nodding respectfully. The sycophants, the ones who fed off my family's toxicity, hung back in the shadows, whispering, terrified of the new reality. It was a clarifying fire. The community I had built here, the ethos of the island, was filtering the guests better than any security team could. I reached the junction where the path split between the guest villas and the staff quarters. Devin was there, standing guard with two members of the security team. His face was stone, but his eyes were warm. Status, I asked. The parents' villa has been secured, Devin reported. We moved their luggage to the holding area near the dock. Marisol personally oversaw the packing to ensure nothing was damaged. We are not them, ma'am. Thank you, Devin. Make sure the staff gets the night of bonus I authorized. Double it for anyone who had to deal with my father directly. Already done. And Ms. Shelton... Devin lowered his voice. They're coming. They're about 2 minutes behind you. They cornered the groom, and now they're hunting for you. Let them come, I said. I'm done running. I waited on a stone bench overlooking the marina. The moon was high now, painting the water in strokes of silver. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm that burst onto the path a moment later. My father led the charge, his face a mask of red fury, his tie undone. Mom was trailing him, sobbing into a handkerchief. Madeline was barefoot, carrying her heels, her makeup smeared. And behind them, looking like a man who had just woken up in a burning building, was Brent, the groom. "You," Dad roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You spiteful, venomous little—" "Stop," I said. I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. I just sat there, the owner of the ground he stood on. "If you scream, I will have security escort you to the boat right now. If you want to talk, you lower your voice." "Talk," Dad hissed, though his volume dropped. "You humiliated us. You destroyed this family in front of Graham Whittaker. Do you have any idea what you've done to my reputation? I have deals pending with people in that tent." "Your reputation." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Dad, your reputation was a house of cards. I just opened a window." "After all we did for you," Mom wailed, stepping forward. "We raised you. We fed you. We gave you life, Alice. And this is how you repay us, by shaming us at your sister's wedding." "You didn't raise me," I said, looking her in the eye. "You managed me. And when I became unmanageable, you discarded me. You gave me life, yes. But I built the life I'm living. You don't get credit for the structure just because you broke ground." "I want a refund," Madeline snapped, throwing her shoes onto the grass. "I want a refund for the emotional damages. You ruined my day. You made it all about you." "It was never about me, Maddie," I said softly. "It was about the truth. You wanted a fairy tale wedding, but you wanted it funded by a sister you despise. You can't have both." "We can fix this," Dad interrupted, his eyes darting around, looking for an angle, a bargain. "Look, Alice, we can spin this. We tell everyone it was a skit, a reveal. We say you're a silent partner in my firm. We can merge the assets. If you transfer a percentage of the holding company to the family trust, I can smooth things over with Whittaker." I stared at him. Even now, standing in the wreckage, he was trying to steal the copper wiring from the walls. "There is no we, Richard," I said. "And there is certainly no transfer of assets. The only thing you're getting from me is a cease and desist letter if you ever use my name or my company's name to leverage a deal again." "But the money," Madeline whined. "Brent and I were counting on the island for the honeymoon week. You can't just kick us out." I looked at Brent. He hadn't said a word. He was staring at my father with a look of dawning horror. "Brent," I said, "did they tell you they owned this place?" Brent swallowed hard. He looked at my father. "Richard, you said the deed was in the family trust. You said it was part of Madeline's dowry." My father sputtered. It's complicated, Brent. Corporate structures, you know how it is." "It's not complicated," I said. "He lied, just like he lied about funding the wedding, just like he lied about my career. He's a fraud, Brent, and now, unfortunately, he's your father-in-law." Brent stepped back from them, physically creating distance. The rift was immediate. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the realization that he had married into a liability, not an asset. "I think," Brent said, his voice cold, "I'm going to go to the hotel on the mainland tonight. Madeline, you can come if you want, but I need to call my lawyer." Madeline screamed, a raw, primal sound of entitlement being denied, and chased after him. Mom looked at me, her face crumbling. "Alice, please, don't do this. People are going to shun us. The club, the board. If Graham Whittaker talks, we're finished socially." "Then I guess you'll have to rely on your character instead of your checkbook," I said. "It's a hard adjustment. I suggest you start now." I signaled to Devon. "Escort Mr. and Mrs. Shelton to the guest transport. Ensure they have water and blankets. But they do not re-enter the resort." "You'll regret this," Dad shouted as the security team moved in. "You'll die alone, Alice. You have no family." "I have plenty of family," I said, watching Marisol bring a bottle of water to a guest who looked faint nearby. "I just don't share DNA with them." They were led away. The noise of their protests faded into the sound of the ocean. I sat there for a long time. I thought I would feel triumphant. I thought I would feel a surge of victory like the end of a movie. But I didn't. I felt a profound aching exhaustion. My hands were trembling in my lap. The adrenaline was leaving my system, leaving behind a hollow space where the anger used to be. I felt grief not for the parents I had, but for the parents I wished I had. I grieved the fantasy that maybe if I was successful enough, if I was generous enough, they would finally love me. Tonight I had killed that fantasy. It was necessary. It was survival. But it still felt like a death. I looked down at my white suit. It was spotless. I was the winner. I was the owner. I was free. I took a deep breath of the salt air, closing my eyes. Standing up for yourself doesn't fix the past. It just stops the past from destroying the future. And that, I realized as I stood up to walk back to my sanctuary, was enough. The sun rose over Isla de la Sombra at 6:15 a.m., painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and violet before settling into a soft, forgiving blue. The island was quiet again. It wasn't the tense silence of a held breath that had plagued the last 3 days. It was the natural, rhythmic silence of a world returning to its proper order. I walked along the shoreline with a cup of coffee, the sand cool and damp between my toes. Further up the beach near the main pavilion, the breakdown crew was already at work. They were folding the white chairs, stacking the tables, and sweeping away the confetti that had littered the grass like fallen snow. The physical evidence of the wedding of the century was being erased piece by piece, leaving only the land behind. I watched a young staff member, a local kid named Mateo, carefully raking the sand where the altar had stood. He looked up, saw me, and gave a small, shy wave. I waved back. There was no fear in his eyes, no calculation. That was the difference. My family saw these people as props in their play. I saw them as the engine that kept the world turning. Resilience, I realized as I took a sip of the dark roast, isn't about winning a fight. It isn't about the moment you drop the microphone or the look on your enemy's face when they realize they've lost. Resilience is what happens the morning after. It's the ability to wake up in the wreckage, look around, and decide that you are still the architect of your own life. I hadn't just beaten them. I had outlasted them. I found Devin near the loading dock, supervising the final shipment of rental equipment heading back to the mainland. He looked tired, but relieved. "The guests?" I asked. "The last of the VIPs departed an hour ago," Devin said, checking his clipboard. "Your family took the cargo transport at midnight as instructed. I received a notification from port security that they landed safely, though I imagine their pride is still lost at sea. And the groom. Mr. Whitaker, the groom, not the uncle, left separately. He took a commercial flight back to New York this morning, alone." I nodded. The fallout had begun. My sister wouldn't just be dealing with a ruined wedding. She would be dealing with a husband who finally saw the price tag of the family he had married into. "Thank you, Devin," I said, "for everything." "It was a pleasure, Ms. Shelton. It's not often we get to see justice served with the hors d'oeuvres." That evening I didn't sit in the master villa alone. I didn't brood in the dark. Instead, I hosted a dinner. It wasn't for the socialites or the investors. I had the kitchen staff set up a long communal table on the wooden pier right over the water. We didn't serve the leftover pâté or the fancy canapés. We had a fish fry red snapper caught that morning by Marisol's husband, rice and beans, fried plantains, and crates of cold cheap beer. I sat in the middle of the table, not at the head. I listened to Elise laugh about the bride's demands. I listened to the security guys reenact my father's face when Graham Whitaker stepped in. For the first time all week, the laughter on this island was real. It wasn't performed for an audience. It was the sound of a community exhaling. Toward the end of the meal, I stood up and tapped my beer bottle with a fork. The table quieted down, smiling faces looking back at me. "I have one announcement," I said. "And don't worry, nobody is getting fired." Laughter rippled through the group. "I bought this island as a sanctuary," I continued. "But a sanctuary isn't just a place to hide. It should be a place to grow. Effective next month, I'm launching a new initiative. The resort will be partnering with the technical college on the mainland. We're going to fund a full hospitality and management training program. Tuition, books, transport, all covered. I looked at Mateo, who was sitting at the end of the table. And we're hiring the graduates first. This place belongs to me on paper, but it belongs to you in practice. I want you to have the credentials to run it or own your own places one day. The cheers that went up were louder than any toast given at my sister's wedding. It felt like grounding a live wire. I was turning the venue of my trauma into a factory for opportunity. That was the real victory. Not the humiliation of my family, but the elevation of the people they had looked down on. Later that night, I sat on my balcony listening to the ocean. The air was heavy with salt and jasmine. My phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up. It was a text message from my mother. It had popped up alongside a dozen missed calls I had ignored throughout the day. Alice, please. We are a family. People are talking. Dad is a wreck. We can fix this. Just call us. I stared at the glowing screen. We can fix this. Even now, after everything, she thought this was a PR crisis. She thought a press release or a staged photo op could repair 30 years of neglect. She didn't understand that some things aren't broken. They're just finished. I had a choice. I could reply. I could engage. I could demand an apology. I could set terms. I could drag this out for years in a cycle of guilt and retribution. I could try to teach them one last time how to love me. But then I remembered the feeling of the wind on the boat ride over the feeling of freedom. I used to think freedom was leaving, I whispered to the empty night. Now I know it's not returning to the cage even when they decorate it. I didn't type a reply. I didn't block the number because that would imply I was afraid of what they might say. Instead, I simply swiped left on the conversation thread. Delete. The message vanished. The screen went black. I set the phone down and leaned back, closing my eyes. The only sound was the waves hitting the shore, washing the island clean over and over again. Some people think revenge is destruction. For me, it was choosing my life and letting them live with the story they wrote about themselves. And that, in the quiet aftermath of the storm, is how Alice Shelton finally chose her own narrative. If you felt that powerful moment of release when she stood up for herself, hit that like button. We read every single comment of your thoughts on this situation and what you would have done in Alice's place. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into complex revenge stories. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Hour. We'll see you next time.